Hi there. I'm Claudia Hosky from Fed Insider. On behalf of the George Washington University Center for Excellence in Public Leadership, Carasoft, and Eightfold, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Ethical AI in Government, Building Your Agency's Diversity Strategy. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pod. If we don't get to them during today's webinar, we'll share them with our speakers so they can follow up. Also take note of the Resources tab on the left side of your screen to download today's slides and additional reading on using AI to create a better and more inclusive future of work. We offer live captioning for all of our webinars. To follow along with us today, use the hyperlink under the Live Captioning or CART tab above the slides. We'll have the full transcript available in the next day or two. And to earn training credit for today's webinar, you'll need to answer all polling questions throughout. And now, let me turn the reins over to our moderator, Jane Norris from Fed Insider, to begin today's discussion. Take it away, Jane.
Thank you, Claudia. And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. You know, in today's heatedly competitive job market, government agencies need solutions for retaining top performers, upskilling and reskilling the workforce, and recruiting new talent efficiently. Now, having a strong diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility program is critical to attract and retain top talent. So today we'll discuss how the use of responsible AI, or artificial intelligence, impacts various aspects of hiring, including improved diversity goals and advancing diverse, fair, and explainable hiring outcomes that adhere to government's well-defined ethical guidelines. Our speakers today are from government and industry, and they'll discuss the use of AI platforms that can be responsibly applied to hiring and retention processes, and how using AI technologies might help attract more diverse applicants, remove human bias from the hiring process, and help meet DEIA goals. So before we get into this fascinating discussion, please meet our talented guests today. Let me introduce first Taka Ariaga. Taka is the Chief Data Scientist and Director of the Innovation Lab at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Taka, welcome and thank you very much for being here. Please tell us about your work and your background.
Thank you, Jane, and always appreciate the invite from Fed Insider and looking forward to today's conversation. My name is Taka Ariaga. Like Jane said, I'm from the Government Accountability Office, and I have a dual-headed role as the Chief Data Scientist, but also have the privilege of directing the work of our Innovation Lab. And I think that's a recognition that on any sort of emerging technology, at least for an agency like a GAO, there is a need for us to figure out how to develop the oversight capacity. But also, just like any other entities, we're looking to adapt to use of those technologies ourselves to further our own capacity. So it's a very interesting day-to-day trying to unpack these capabilities while simultaneously trying to figure out how we can use them for our own sort of mission delivery work.
Great. Thank you, Taka. I appreciate that. Do you want to tell us about your background a little bit?
Yeah, so I've been with in a professional services firm in most of my career, and just recently joined Government Accountability Office as its first Chief Data Scientist. And I have to say, it's been a very fascinating transition so far, 3 years into my tenure. The scope of the issue, the responsibility in getting something like accountable AI right, it is significant in a way that, as a government, we certainly don't want to be the one that are promulgating, for example, systemic biases and discriminatory practices. And so getting the AI implementations right up front is fairly, it's a very important aspect of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And we know because AI pervades across government mission delivery, and it's sort of incumbent upon us to have a really cohesive strategy in terms of how we go about conducting some of these accountability evaluations, and so that there's an element of trust but verify.
Well, that's an incredible background, so thank you very much for bringing your expertise to this conversation today. Let's next talk to Greg Singleton. Greg is Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Greg, tell us about your work and your background.
Sure. Thank you, Jane, and thank you to Claudia, Fed Insider, and our sponsors. Just really excited to talk to the group today. As Jane mentioned, I'm the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer for Health and Human Services. And I couldn't have really a cooler job in the federal government. My role is to work on developing these capabilities of AI tools across the agency, which really has roles from birth to old age for all of the nation. And we have these just such incredible missions for helping out the health and well-being of our populace. And so we get to work on these new AI tools and figure out how can we enhance those missions, how can we do things better, how can we make things happen. In terms of my background, my undergraduate degrees in systems engineering from UVA. I've got degrees in technology and policy and political science from MIT, and leadership, executive leadership training at Harvard. I think I was telling Jane I've worked with the federal government for roughly 12 years, starting over at Department of Energy, working on energy innovation, entrepreneurship, new technology development, and I've worked across DOE for quite some time, then hopped over to HHS, ran a cybersecurity office, and then most recently, prior to this, through the pandemic, had the opportunity to become the program manager of the largest public health data system that's ever been created through the HHS Protect system that we use to collect hospital, vaccination, population health data all across the nation throughout the course of the pandemic. Quite an interesting role to find ourselves as an agency at the center of that response, and really an opportunity to push the envelope in some of the technologies and show what's really possible for public health applications. With that context, just looking forward to doing similar things in the AI realm of working at the intersection of technology, policy, public health, mission space, health services delivery, and seeing how we can make all this stuff better and enhance the department's missions and national delivery. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And such a great agency, HHS. So many things going on there and so many sub-agencies. So you definitely have a big responsibility. So thanks for joining us today. Carol J. Smith is our next guest. She's a senior research scientist, works with the Defense Innovation Unit. Carol, please tell us about your background and some of your work.
Yes, I'm happy to. I've been working with the Defense Innovation Unit to support the responsible AI efforts and accelerate their work with really getting commercial technology and methodologies into the DoD. And I'm a researcher for the Software Engineering Institute. We're in FFRDC, and so that work is through the SEI. And there I focus on human-machine teaming and conducting research and supporting human-centered design for our government customers in the SEI's AI division. And I'm currently leading research to make better hazard analysis tools for people who are making AI-enabled systems, such as autonomous vehicles and robots, emerging technologies, and of course, recommender systems and many of the day-to-day technologies that we all use. And that research is to support the definition of these systems that people are willing to be responsible for. So a lot of this is around responsible AI and human-centered design. And I look at topics such as ethics and trust and user experience and human-computer interaction, and use those methods and practices in that work. And I have a master's degree in human-computer interaction from DePaul University, and I've been conducting research to improve the human experience across industries for over 20 years. And I've been working to integrate ethics and improve experiences with these more complex systems, including AI and autonomous vehicles, since 2015.
Wow, that's really incredible. It's such a new technology, and yet you've worked in it for quite a long time, so not so new as many of us think. Thanks, Carol. Also, Dan Hopkins is with us. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Dan is the Vice President of Applied AI at Eightfold. Dan, thanks very much for being here with us today. Tell us about your background and your work.
Absolutely, and thank you, Carol. Thank you to Fed Insider and to one of my alma maters, GW and the Center of Excellence in Public Leadership, for hosting this event today. Really happy to be a part of it. As Carol mentioned, I am the VP of Applied AI at Eightfold AI. We are the creators of the first talent intelligence platform, which is really exclusively developed and run using artificial intelligence. And our technology is used today by some of the largest enterprise businesses, both in the US and also globally too as well, where they trust our AI in really being able to find the right candidate for the right role and also understand the talent that they have within an organization. Eightfold is really founded on the premise that the current hiring process of today is fundamentally broken and inefficient. And that might sound a little bombastic, but I'd introduce to you the concept of job descriptions, which we all know is really a woefully inadequate description of need or articulation of need. And yet all of our job seekers are really asked to match and self-assess against that vaguely worded document. So there's a tremendous amount of inefficiencies on this two-sided network effect that really create a lot of downstream problems that notably also have a big negative impact on DE&I. So at Eightfold, we really created a better way to use artificial intelligence to really understand the capabilities and need of an individual or of an organization and the capabilities and potential of each individual candidate, which I'm happy to talk about more throughout the program. A little bit about me. I've been with Eightfold for about 4 years. I'm currently responsible for our public sector globally, where I'm having conversations both with federal government and state governments in particular, to help enable their displaced workers find rapid reemployment and upskill, reskill using artificial intelligence technologies. I have an undergraduate degree in political science. My master's degree at GW was in information systems technology and an MBA from Columbia.
Well, it's an honor to talk to you all today. And Dan, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of background. It's a fascinating conversation, so let's get to it. Let's first discuss the use of AI systems in the federal hiring process and the potential impact on agency diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility goals. Taka, let me ask you first. The GAO has an AI accountability framework, which was published in 2021. It talks about key practices for federal agencies that are considering selecting and implementing AI systems. So in light of our conversation today about hiring and retention and ethical AI, can you tell us how agencies are using the framework?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And the GAO's AI accountability framework is certainly an example of our foresight work. From our perspective, a time to figure out, in leading practices is not when something has gone horribly wrong. It is while the AI system is being developed and implemented and scaled. And as I mentioned in my introduction, we often talk a lot about trusting AI system, but from a GAO perspective, we really very much looking forward to taking the approach of trust but verify. What kind of technical artifacts, what kind of governance documentation, what kind of sort of key performance metrics can we evaluate to sort of alleviate, for example, performance issue, but certainly some of these societal impacts that we often hear about. So the framework itself was sort of developed to cover across the life cycle of AI development, from governance all the way through continuous monitoring. And on top of that, we took a more of a three-dimensional view by laying out, the components element of an AI system needs to perform as well as a sort of integrated system that often are essentially a groupings of machine learning model capabilities. So having that both micro level as well as a macro level view, we think is a sort of important construct. And so certainly from the framework perspective, we're not sort of opining on whether a particular use of AI is appropriate or not appropriate. What we're looking for is, whether those governance are being followed, whether there's due process being afforded, whether there are concept of a sort of team sports being applied. So it's not just a singular data science, developing the solution, but having really diversity of that perspective. And then there is sort of an auditability, traceability, and all some of the leading practices are then incorporated throughout the life cycle development process. So we're in since we published the framework last year, we have been working across GAO in terms of how we're using the framework to conduct evaluations of AI implementation. And we're also working with our oversight partners across IG community, state and local, as well as the international colleagues to really, help them understand the accountability framework, but also make it clear that as the technologies themselves are evolving, the framework itself will also co-evolve alongside. So we're very much looking forward to this as a sort of evolving process, especially as sort of different capabilities are coming online.
Does this get revised, and do you have a potential date in the future where you might have another version? I know you just published this very recently, but is there a regular publication schedule?
No, we don't have a defined schedule. What we do is take a very sort of deliberate pulse on the sort of advancements of the technology itself, and this is where the innovation lab work comes into play to say, rather than sort of playing more of an observer role around AI, we ourselves want to be practitioners of AI so that we can really understand what does state of the art look like and how do we incorporate those capabilities with, for our GAO's own benefit. So as we participate in forum discussions like this, as we participate in our discussion with our other partners, we're trying to sort of see, what kind of updates make sense. And, in terms of what we're seeing around the corner, I think in the very near future, there will be a need for some sort of interoperable view around the various accountability frameworks out there, but also probably a layer of differentiated instantiation in terms of different use cases for AI have different consideration relative to biases, relative to performance. And so making sure that we're not necessarily painting all AI systems with one broad stroke. And so be able to sort of take that delineation in a much more of a granular way, I think is sort of the next frontier. So we'll continue to stay close to AI. It's something that we know the technology is not going away. It's certainly not a fad. So we're internally developing our own capacity to conduct a variety of oversight activity relating to AI.
All right, thanks, Taka. So Greg, let's talk about the use of AI systems in the hiring process. What tasks could AI potentially perform for an agency as large and diverse as HHS to help support leaders in their hiring and their diversity goals?
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I think as you pointed out, just looking at the scale and scope of HHS, we are a significant agency with a lot of employees. I think actually this morning we were in a discussion, and it's depending on how you count, it's between 85,000 employees and 90-some thousand direct employees. That means there are a lot of human capital to work with within the department, but also a lot of folks that you need to bring on board to help ensure we have the skills, the talent, the diversity, the backgrounds to accomplish our missions and represent the nation. When we look at AI systems for hiring, I think it's interesting to look at where the private sector is and some of the, what I'd say, experiments they have. Maybe they're further than experience, but the work that the private sector has been doing in trying to use AI for hiring practices. And there's a lot of different approaches that have been taken, and a lot of firms and individuals that have achieved pretty significant and meaningful results in improving the hiring process through the use of AI. In the federal government, we have a fair number of policies and procedures that we have to use for the hiring process. So first, we have to ensure that we're following everything there to do things in an appropriate manner and ensure that we are being fair to all involved in the hiring process. Nonetheless, there's a lot that we can probably do with AI for the hiring process to help improve things, looking to the private sector, looking to other approaches that folks have taken, where really we can, again, with 90,000 employees, that's a lot of positions that get posted, a lot of resumes that come in. How can we use AI tools to speed up and get through the workload so that we're able to identify candidates, skilled, talented candidates, diverse candidates that represent the nation, and just get through that overall workflow, and really it's a bandwidth issue. We get, probably tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of resumes a year. So if we can use AI tools in an opportunistic manner to get through those candidates, bring folks to the fore so that we can identify them and work with them. My belief is we can use AI as an opportunity to improve the hiring process and get better results when done well. When done well, using some of the accountability framework principles that Taka just laid out. But really, there's an opportunity using AI to do better. And I want to think of it as that opportunity, not just a risk if we do it poorly. The opportunity, if we do it well, is very much on my mind and something that's there.
Right, to improve systems and to give, employees assistance with some of the tasks that may be more routine or might, not really fit the role anymore. Things change in government, and just having someone perform a function manually may not be really the best use of their time at this stage of the game.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. All right. So that's great. Thank you very much, Greg, for that. Carol, I'm going to sort of shape it a little differently for you. As agencies go through the process of defining an ideal candidate and what that background looks like, how do they assess the reliability of the data they're using to develop their models and resolve any unintended bias in the process?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's such a complex problem too, because this data, any data is going to be created and curated and collected by humans. It's going to have a purpose, a bias in it. And so there's that issue. And then the idea of an ideal candidate in itself is really problematic, because then the system will learn potentially patterns that are unintended within the data. And there have been cases where systems have unfortunately learned patterns that were inherent in the data because that was the information that the system was given. And so we do need to be very careful about reviewing data, making sure that the data that we're using, particularly if it is of the current employees, current people that may already have a bias towards a certain type of person or a certain, lack of diversity potentially within that. Those kinds of problems can't be solved with AI. So those are the types of things where we really need to go through the data itself and review it, make sure that we understand what bias is there, what that information may result in, and then make sure that we're doing, a lot of testing, doing initial creation of a system, seeing how the system is interpreting the data and making sure that it is doing what we intend it to do. Again, the system won't be able to remove existing biases and will likely find patterns that we don't intend it to find. And so it's really important to not only understand the initial data that's required to make the system work, but that we're also constantly verifying and observing and monitoring the system to make sure that it's continuing to work in the way we intend, and not shifting or creating unintentional meaning from the data that it's using.
Thanks, Carol. We'll get into more depth about how you test and make sure you're getting the kind of responses that you are looking for in a little bit. But Dan, I also want to ask you work on systems and work with many different clients with the use of AI technologies. Can you share some best practices and tell us how you have seen AI systems work effectively to support the HR managers to improve their hiring and other diversity goals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably best captured in three statements, and I'll dive into those a little bit. The first is just creating overall efficiency, and mostly when I'm talking about efficiency, I'm talking about speed to hire and reduction of cost to hire. The second is providing deeper insights in both really what's required for the role and the overall understanding of a candidate's skill sets, and perhaps even more importantly in today's job markets, their potential. And then third, being able to be more inclusive within the hiring process to meet some of the DEIA requirements that many federal agencies are now tasked with really incorporating into their hiring process. As Greg said earlier, that there is a tremendous bandwidth issue today within the federal government in just terms of the overall scale of applications that come through federal agencies. No secret that many agencies receive hundreds of thousands of applicants per year. And if you think about the downstream impact of agencies having to go through that, it's just almost impossible to really go through and evaluate each candidate for a particular role. And so what does that mean? It means that the agencies are spending a lot of time doing that. And also it means that perhaps every candidate is really not getting a fair evaluation for those roles, which also can create bias, systematic bias within the process. And so the first part, if I go back to efficiency, really what AI can do is really assist and augment the human in the loop, right? Who are the individuals that have the skill sets or potentials that we should really be considering for each role? And artificial intelligence does that really well. It can rationalize skill sets. It can understand adjacent skill sets. So if a candidate has skill A, might they also have skill B? Or could they learn skill C, and to what velocity? Because in today's job market, it's not just about if the person has done the role before. It's really about, can they do the job? Do they have the capabilities? The added benefit for that is that it actually has an uplift in terms of really sort of underserved communities that might not have had the role but are just looking for their big break. And so when you start considering potential, not only are you getting greater insights into capabilities, you're actually promoting groups that may not have previously been considered into those roles. And in terms of insight, what you're able to do is really understand and rationalize those skill sets in a way that you probably haven't been able to be done before. Most hiring managers, recruiters that I know don't know every single company that's out there, and they don't know every role at those companies. Therefore, they don't really understand the skills or aptitude that was required to perform those roles. And so unless you have intimate knowledge of where somebody has worked and what the role has done, you really are just taking best guess or relying upon whatever they have claimed that they said they've done in your assessment of that particular candidate. And so artificial intelligence can really validate those skill sets and also infer skill sets in a way that provides tremendous insight to that human in the loop where they can decide to advance that candidate to sort of the next overall stage. This also aligns very nicely with Executive Order 13932, the modernization and reforming the assessment of hiring federal job candidates, where you're pivoting away from sort of educational based requirements and really now looking at experiential skill sets that are gained. So what has the person done before and what are those skill sets? So we can enable those skill sets both in terms of the overall understanding of the applicant, but also understanding what it is that the agency actually needs from a skill set perspective, right? Because if you don't know exactly the skills that you're looking to hire for, how can you properly evaluate the candidate's skill sets in which are applying to your role? And then finally, and this is sort of the most important given today's discussion, is inclusiveness. How do you be very conscientious about filtering in underserved communities into the federal pipeline? So how can we make sure that we increase the diversity of candidates within our overall process so that we're considering these candidates? Skill sets and potential is one of those ways. But also, how can you guard against unconscious bias within the hiring process? So, we take a diversity-first approach in the creation of all of our algorithms. We don't look at biometric data. We purposely suppress gender, race, ethnicity, et cetera. And we really only look at those skill sets, those career trajectories, the adjacencies of skill sets to build the capabilities metrics on potential so that we can surface those candidates algorithmically. But of course, because we're augmenting and assisting human in the loop, it really becomes an imperative to make sure that you can guard against that unconscious bias. And so artificial intelligence can bring extra value through candidate masking, where you obfuscate essentially all those characteristics from the profile, and you're really allowing the human in the loop to make determinations based off the merits of the candidate alone. And then finally, in terms of just overall insight, and this also, by the way, aligns to Biden's executive order of 14035, creating that diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility in federal workforce, is also providing data-driven insights. So how actually are you doing within the hiring process? What are the composition of skill sets across that diversity that you have today? And then where are you actually losing people within the process, and how does that compare across say, female and male candidates, right? Are we losing female candidates after on-site interviews versus male candidates? What's going on there? And oftentimes those insights can effectuate really offline action too as well to take corrective action. So artificial intelligence can play a really important role to not only provide new insights, create those new efficiencies, but also create a more inclusive workforce.
That's really a great answer. And I mean, it just shows the depth of assistance that AI systems could perform. So thank you very much for that, Dan. We're going to talk now about the use of AI systems, how they might be used for certain tasks, and how they're monitored and tested to make sure they're achieving fair and equitable and explainable results. Greg, let me ask you, how much of the work done today around hiring and retention at HHS, for instance, would benefit from assistance from an AI system?
Sure, thanks for the question. You know, when I think of this in terms of what components and what elements of the hiring process would benefit from AI, it's really, you know, looking at things that help with those speed to hire metrics, things that help with getting through the volume of resumes, things that help with getting through just the scale of the hiring challenges faced by the federal employees that allow us to get to a place where we then become in a position to hire somebody. You know, I'm trying to think back to some examples of hiring instances we've had that we've worked on in the federal government. I remember one instance where we assembled all the managers in the division. We got in a conference room and we plowed through something like 1,200 or 1,400 resumes as a group of 8 people, you know, spending, you know, probably good 3-4 solid hours in a conference room just doing that manually. I can think of another instance where to get a candidate on board, we ended up going through several hiring announcements, and I think we went through 1,700 resumes for that position to get somebody on board. What I will add on that is not only, you know, are you looking to AI tools to speed up the process, but, you know, the basis of the question where we started was, are we achieving fair, equitable, and explainable results? For a lot of these human labor-based processes, you can audit after the fact, but you don't necessarily have much data or much analytics to help you ensure that you are getting to fair, equitable, and explainable results. And so, you know, not only can you use AI systems to help get through the crushing workload and volume of interest that we see in the hiring process, you can also use the tools because they're traceable, because they have data, because they have analytics, and you can actually do more, I believe, to ensure you are getting to those fair, equitable, and explainable results. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, but, you know, not only can you get through the bandwidth, not only can you improve the speed to hire, I think you can improve the equitability and explainability of the results at the end of the day.
Yeah, and talk about the analytics for a moment, because if you had the data points to examine your results, would that, I mean, is that something that's currently examined, or is that only something that could be done through, you know, adding an AI system?
I'd say there are instances and elements where those are examined, but it's silos and pockets where we're doing that on a routine basis. With the, you know, implementation of more rigorous AI systems, I think you could do that as a more routine basis and have more comprehensive coverage. You know, it requires dedicated effort to make that happen today, and I think you could make it more routine in the future.
Right. The use of analytics to make decisions, you know, based on what your explainable results makes perfect sense.
Yeah, the analytics to see how are we doing. Did we have these objectives? Did we get to those objectives? And just having that as a regular course of business rather than a manual effort, I think would be beneficial.
All right, that's great explanation. Thank you very much, Carol. Let's talk about some of the processes that really, you know, AI might go through that need to be monitored to make sure they're addressing program objectives and other initiatives like DEI, diversity goals. I'll just put it that way. Diversity goals. So how do you make sure that the systems are on track? And what skill sets do agency leaders and the workforce need to keep AI programs on track?
Yeah, so there are a variety. It always depends. It depends on the system, but definitely making sure that you are meeting those goals. So as Dan was talking about, if the system is obfuscating race, gender, et cetera, measures that would actually need to be measured later, you'll want to make sure that those obviously carry through and are still connected to that candidate's information so that you can actually measure your progress. And so depending on what you're trying to address, you'll need not only the data, but also interfaces that provide that information in a way that is understandable to the people who need to be monitoring the system. So there's monitoring on the back end, making sure that the AI system is performing as required, that people are in control of the system, and that they're able to do what they need to do with the system. And then there's monitoring more on the front end, if you will, where people who work in HR departments, people who are hiring managers, that sort of thing, need different information, different levels of information, and different explanations of the information. And so in order to do that, you need, on the back end, you need data scientists looking at the data, and probably HR specialists as well, helping to create the system, make sure that it has the right information, that it's organized, labeled appropriately, et cetera, and machine learning experts and developers to build the whole system. And then you will also need people who do user experience work, human-computer interaction work, really understanding the users and their needs so that you're building the right front-end experience as well. So it's a combination of skills, and because this work is ongoing, as you mentioned, that there's that constant need to both monitor and understand the system, that work is cyclical. Some of the work I did with the Defense Innovation Unit was creating worksheets to help people through the planning, development, and deployment stages of this work so that they have tools to help them think through what they're doing, why they're doing it, who they're making it for, and then what are the different areas that they need to be aware of as they're doing this work. And also this can help them to understand the commitments that they're making to maintaining an AI system and making sure that it continues to be successful in supporting their DEI goals. DEIA goals.
Yeah. Something Dan mentioned in his comments, making sure that you have a diverse group of people that are being considered for roles, but that must also be important in the monitoring process too, right? The skill set.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. So also internal diversity, right?
Correct. The people making the system should be a diverse group of people, both diverse in their, their personal experiences and their backgrounds, as well as with regard to their skill set and their education levels and experiences in education. All of that matters because those individuals, if they are a diverse group, they're going to bring different types of questions, they're going to bring different points of view, and they're going to have different experiences, and they can apply that knowledge and awareness to the system, and you're going to end up with a more robust and better system because of that. They're also much more likely to be speculative about potential issues that can occur in the system, and that can help, again, to make a much more equitable system that is more robust as well.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. That's a real unique challenge. How do you not only just track the data, but also track who's in the decision-making loop. So Taka, I'll turn to you. How often should AA systems be tested or audited to make sure that they're meeting intended hiring outcomes, and who should be involved in that process?
Yeah, that's a very easy question for me to answer. It is continuously. I think AI, of all technologies out there, is one of those capabilities that cannot be implemented and every 5 years you come back and audit it and hoping for the best. because by definition, machine learning are constantly evolving, constantly adapting to incoming stream of data. It's well documented that the current generation of machine learning are often very fragile, very susceptible to either intentional or unintentional manipulation. So questions around data-driven, model-driven, I mean, those all require sort of constant attention to make sure that however the system is developed, designed, deployed, and ultimately sustained, continues to function the way that meets the performance objective, meets the sort of compliance objective, meets the some of the efficiency and effectiveness metrics that Dan and Greg talked about. But within GAO's ethos, we talk about effectiveness, efficiency, and economics of federal program. But something that we always are mindful is making sure that those capabilities are also ethical and equitable in terms of how they're being implemented. So, from GAO perspective, we're always looking to build our own capacity to conduct continuous auditing. And I think AI is one area that we must have those capabilities to continually come back to make sure that not only from a management side perspective, but also from an oversight community point of view, that we can continually have that assurance that, despite susceptibility towards drift, that the system continues to function the way that it is intended. And that certainly begins with, the sort of upstream governance process. As Dan alluded, there's ways that AI are being implemented through procurement process, and there are ways that AIs are being implemented through a sort of custom development process. And so we want to make sure that there are sort of questions that can be asked around the auditability of something that was purchased, whether those solutions are being trained on commercial data or federal data, and et cetera. Those matter in terms of how we end up driving the ultimate hiring objective. And something that I'll just use a simple example, right? Within the federal government, there are a myriad of federal information assurance framework like NIST 853 revision 4 or 5, depending on who you talk to. There are various federal specific encryption standards. So if a particular AI capability is trained on commercial skill sets, that may, we may sort of achieve the efficiency metrics, but we may not necessarily achieve the effectiveness metric that a federal sort of customer may be looking for because of some of those fairly unique federal compliance programs. And so we want to make sure that, there is a way for either the management or oversight body to have that audit right on sort of procure AI capability. Same thing on the custom developed side of it. We want to make sure that we can go in and understand how the predictive variables were selected, how were the sort of component machine learning models developed in terms of the techniques applied. And then once those machine learning models are strung together as an ecosystem, are they continue to perform in the same ways? Are there differences between training data, validation data, and the production data? And those, I think, will all drive towards a long-term stability and sort of the potential issue that might arise. So I think the concept of continuous monitoring, and I agree with Carol and Greg on this as well, is very important. And it's also a team sport, and that's something that we make it very clear within GAO's AI accountability framework, is that equitability, ethics is not a responsibility, it's not the sole responsibility of the data scientist or the program manager. Right? We need to have general counsel being involved. We need to have civil rights advocates being involved. We need to have the end users being involved in that conversation. So it really is taking that team sports mentality, not just necessarily, demand that a mathematicians or data scientist says, develop great work, make sure that you have a high p-value or r-value, whatever those performance metrics might look like. Oh, and by the way, also be ethical and equitable at the same time. I'm not sure that is a reasonable expectation. So to sum up, I think AI systems should be continually tested, continually monitored, but also that process really needs to involve a diverse set of skill sets.
Yeah, that's a great contextual answer because, just the breadth of what you're discussing and all of the parameters involved is quite intense. So thank you very much for that explanation. Dan, how can leaders and agencies who are adopting AI technologies build public trust and demonstrate that AI is being used responsibly and the results are fair and equitable, as Taka just discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think really it starts from the very beginning in being purposeful in the selection and use and really technology of AI that you are selecting and proposing to implement. I know this might sound a little biased as the AI talent provider on the call, but I think building an AI system for hiring in general, if you were to try to take that on your own, is probably a bad idea for the same reasons it would be a bad idea to build your own cybersecurity software, right? And that's because it's extremely complicated and it's consistently and continuously evolving and changing. I mean, there are data issues where you want to ensure that you have the right data and that data is representative. There are issues with the AI algorithms that you want to make sure that you're testing and being purposeful in the design and making sure and ensuring that you're not using or implementing or deploying AI algorithms that are causing unintended bias. And of course, there's ethical and privacy considerations that go into this. And these are very complicated subjects that, again, change quite a bit. And to be able to kind of stay on top of those and really cover all of those sufficiently, our position is that we gain from the benefit of learning from all of our customers that are out there, continuously improving the product, and we do take AI considerations and algorithms and the impact of bias mitigation very seriously, and it's foremost the deployment of all of our algorithms. And for those very reasons, we stay away from using things like biometric data or automating decisions based off of, say, sentiment analysis or facial patterns in an interview process. I think those are also a bad idea. In general, I kind of see AI as falling under three buckets, and those are really assist, augment, and automate. I think assist can help an individual just like streamline the workflow, and those are kind of low-level things that are not very controversial. And then there's sort of left with augmentation and automation. We really are focused on augmentation, really helping the human in the loop to make the best decisions, and I think that is a really key strategy in avoiding some of the pitfalls of artificial intelligence, and really that's the pitfalls fall under that last category of automation. When you're fully automating a decision, especially when it comes to hiring, that can be problematic very quickly, especially if you're looking at things like biometric data or sentiment analysis or tonality. That is probably, the verdict is not only out, it's probably wrong to use AI in those categories. And so I think focusing on how can we use artificial intelligence to surface the best information to the human in the loop so they can make that best decision really goes a long way in ensuring public trust. And then the last thing I'll say is that, I think being able to provide traceability and explainability within the AI outcomes is also something that's absolutely critical. And in some instances, like GDPR, for instance, I mean, that's mandatory. We have to provide that information. It's something that we comply with as well. And so providing that explainability not only serves public trust, but it goes beyond what you have today, which is really humans only making those decisions. And, kind of the human mind in a lot of ways is the ultimate black box. And so there can be some explainability there in terms of why they made the decision, but supported by data, especially through artificial intelligence can provide, just provides even more assurity and clarity in the decisions for candidate selection.
Boy, that is a great point. Yes, you're absolutely right. The data doesn't lie, or maybe data says different things to different people. I guess that's the only issue. Thank you, Dan. That's a great comment. So let's now talk about how things would change. So if there are candidates and HR managers, hiring managers that are, looking at the process, new process coming on board, Carol, how would they attune themselves? How would those different types of people attune themselves to new processes that may not feel familiar or, get used to a system that is trying to remove human bias from the hiring process, but that doesn't, that process is changing. What do you do to familiarize and get best use of these systems with people that aren't used to using them?
Yeah, and that really comes down to really focusing on those individuals and building systems that are usable and really focused on the purpose that they're made for. Much like we would not use garden tools for cooking, we would not want an HR system that an HR manager or a hiring manager is using to be exactly the same as what the candidate is using. There should be very different experiences for different audiences. And so that really does come down to making good quality systems, using user experience, human-centered design practices to make sure that the system is designed in a way that is really helpful to the individual, so that when they are looking at the information they have in front of them, and as Dan was mentioning, they're really making the decision, because the human needs to be the one that's responsible for it. Making that system does require a lot of work, making it usable, useful, and making sure that the people who are using it have awareness of how the system works, what its capabilities are, that they have context of how the system is interpreting information, that they have evidence that helps them understand that. And all of that helps to build what we call calibrated trust. So it's not that we don't want people trusting computers 100%, much like we don't expect them to trust another human 100%. We want them to be somewhat skeptical or aware of the system, but they should trust the system to do what it was intended to do. And in order to do that, they have to understand the system at the appropriate level, in the appropriate way. So really focusing on designing systems for specific individuals, groups of individuals who are doing specific tasks is the best way. It's not that humans need to necessarily adjust, although obviously we all have to learn these systems, but the systems shouldn't be unusable. They should be relatively easy to learn, because they've been designed well and designed for the purpose that they're intended for. As Taka said, it is a team sport. It requires a lot of different people involved in the process, and it can take a little bit more time, but it does not have to slow it down. And if the system has a higher level of acceptance, the whole process will be much better, and hopefully we will get to the point where we get people in jobs faster.
Yeah, and a more diverse set of people in those jobs. So Dan,
Exactly.
When clients are using, thank you. These are great answers. It's such a fascinating conversation today. So Dan, when clients use AI systems for hiring and recruiting, in your experience, what are they trying to solve? What issues are they trying to solve?
Sure. I think Carolyn, you just set me up really well on that. I think the high level answer, first and foremost, is just get people into jobs faster and get more diverse people into those jobs. Today the average time to hire for the federal government is close to 100 days, and that was sort of the numbers that I saw there were sort of pre-pandemic, pre-Great Resignation. So I don't know if that's gone up. I suspect it has, but that would just be speculation. But in some more specialized jobs across the federal government, it's not uncommon for those to be over a year or 400 days. And so how can you compete in the federal government with the private sector there? And I think the short answer is that you can't, right? NASA used to be the only place that you go to build rockets. Today, there's a lot of different options. You go to SpaceX, you go to Blue Origin. Not only will they pay you more, but they'll probably hire you within days, if not weeks, while you're still potentially waiting for, on average, a long time within the federal government. So I think the very first value proposition is just a reduction of cost and time to hire, so that you can be assured that you're not making it difficult. You're removing the friction for those job applicants, and then to be able to better understand which applicants are the ones that you want to talk to, right? I've never met a recruiter or a hiring manager that likes to go out and source new individuals. They really want to sell the mission. They want to sell the brand of the agency and start having conversations with individuals that are actually relevant and right for the role. Both instances, artificial intelligence can help, because it really allows you to start having those meaningful conversations to place those individuals into the right job and rediscover candidates that might have not been a good fit, right? I mentioned earlier that most agencies get hundreds of thousands of applicants. Rarely do they ever get looked at again. But if you take the premise that job descriptions are a poor articulation of need, aka vaguely worded, and that you understand that job applicants are self-assessing their own capabilities off of vaguely worded resume or job descriptions, what you realize really quickly are people are getting it wrong, right? They're applying to the wrong job. So with artificial intelligence, you can go back and look at all of those applicants who, by the way, are qualified leads. They're very interested in working in the agency, and rediscover them for the right role. And this is a very powerful use case for artificial intelligence in terms of just being able to enable and accelerate your recruitment process. And the last thing that I'll say is that, yes, it can benefit for sort of the internal hiring teams, but think about the candidate experience as well. Oftentimes, if I go to a job board, it's unclear on which job should I apply. I first have to make a decision on what keyword search that I will be using, which presupposes that I know what I'm looking for, and I miss all of the opportunities that are actually relevant to me. So artificial intelligence can create a better user experience by instead looking at that individual's profile, their experience, their skill sets, but more importantly, their potential, which again, when we start talking about DEIA, I mean, this is a game changer, because now for the first time, if they've never done that role before, but they have the skill sets or they're on a career trajectory to do it, now they're surfaced and they're being considered in ways that they weren't previously. And so when you sort of remove all of the noise and you surface the candidates, the best jobs for them, then that matching and search is optimized. And so it becomes win-win for both the job candidates and the hiring agencies.
So I love that. I love that you're looking for the potential in candidates for not just the job that they're applying for, but the one that they might fit best for. Thanks, Dan. And Taka, what areas in government would benefit from AI assistance? Have you seen a best practice or a use case that has worked very effectively?
Not for me personally in the hiring arena, but I do try to keep a tab on various regulatory regimes that are coming online. So the one most recently in New York City comes to mind in terms of the AI solutions being used in hiring practices. There are requirements for bias audits. There's requirements for continuous monitoring and disclosure and whatnot. I think that is a positive development in terms of an attempt to make sure that hiring practices are done equitably and ethically. From a use case perspective, as Dan was talking, I thought of a couple of areas where it might be an interesting use case for application of AI. One is around, not all biases are bad, right? Because I may feel like I'm a funny guy, but that is an example of an optimistic bias that AI is not susceptible to. So how do we use AI to remove some of those human-centric type of biases? So, for example, I might prefer R over Python, so that might creep into my evaluation. But certainly an AI model can help to alleviate that type of sort of discriminatory viewpoint. And then also from a compliance perspective, I think AI could be really helpful in terms of making a privacy preservation type of decisioning so that we're not necessarily seeing the name, for example. I mean, there's a well-documented example where when you see certain types of names, they're already automatically, the human reviewers are making certain assumptions. So how do we preserve privacy? How do we make sure that the compliance function is done in a way that doesn't burden the reviewer, so that the reviewer can more focus on the skill set? And just from a skill sets perspective, oftentimes I'm looking for not just necessarily good fit, I'm looking for potentially bad fit by looking at the totality of the resume, for example. Do those experience correspond to, so not just highlighting those good fit, but also highlighting those candidates that may not necessarily be the top of the pile, if you will, from a skill set and experience perspective, and maybe help me prioritize where is the best place for me to focus my energy. So those are the couple examples that come to mind.
Yeah, these are great examples, and I think that's the difference between the application process then and the application process that's to be in the future. So so many things are suggested to us as we work on our computers, and why not in the hiring process? So Greg, I will turn to you now for the final question. How does human oversight of federal hiring and retention change with AI systems support?
I think that's a great question, and I will try to answer this in lightning round fashion, looking at the time. But I try to think of other manufacturers and how they approach quality control issues. If I go to a paint manufacturer and I say, I want this paint to be a specific color, do they say, I guarantee it will be that color, and then they turn to their machine, they build the machine, spit out the paint, and they deliver it to me? Or do they spit out the paint and do they check and validate? Do they go and check a few batches? Do they see how it's turning out? And that's what we're looking at in terms of, if I take that example and bring that back to AI, I look at human oversight. And so what you're really doing is going to the machine, going to the systems, getting outputs and checking and validating, really just as we do in any other production process or manufacturing process. And that allows us to ensure that we're getting quality results, that we are trusting the results, and in auditing that and providing that transparency to the public, we can help ensure that the public trusts the results as well.
Well, I love that idea, the fact that we are not the only, the buck doesn't only stop with us, that there are different ways that you can get a provable result from what you're trying to achieve. So this has been an incredibly fascinating conversation. I can't believe the hour has flown by. I want to thank our guests today. They have been so knowledgeable, and I just love this conversation. There are more like this. You can find them online at fedinsider.com. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Claudia Hosky.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks so much again to all of our speakers today. And to our audience, thank you so much for your participation. Training certificates will be emailed after the webinar ends, and remember to log back in the next day or two to download a copy of today's transcript. We have many webinars in the works, so be sure to visit fedinsider.com to see what's coming up and to register for multiple events at the same time. And while you're there, you can check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. And with that, this is Fed Insider signing off.